When it comes to World of Warcraft, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Classic, TBC, Wrath of the Lich King, or even retail. There's normally a few things you need to ask yourself. Which faction do you want to be? Which class do you want to be? And which races are available for the class that you want to play? Now, when we go into Wrath of the Lich King, it's not going to be any different. If you're already trying to decide on what you want to play in Wrath of the Lich King, in terms of class, spec, race, this video might be able to help because we're going to talk about all of the racial differences between TBC and Wrath. So how the bonuses you get from the race that you're playing changes in Wrath of the Lich King Classic, or ordinarily in the pre-patch. Deciding on which race you're going to play, to some people, just comes down to aesthetics. If you like a dwarf, you might want to play a dwarf. If you like a night elf, you might want to play a night elf. If you absolutely detest the gnome starting area, you might end up going human just so you can do a starting area that you like, and you might not be that bothered about the bonuses. But you really should be bothered about the bonuses, because in both PvE and PvP, some of these bonuses make a huge difference. And I do mean huge, even though the numbers may seem really small when we're talking about, you know, for example, where you're getting 3 expertise or something like that. But when you actually add that 3 expertise up into rating, it can be the equivalent of wearing 2 or 3 items. So we're going to go through every race, starting with a Draenei. I'm going to end on the human because the human is the most OP. So firstly, starting with TBC, you get gem cutting skill, which is just a dual crafting skill increase by 5. And if we look at Wrath, it's exactly the same, increasing your dual crafting skill by 5, so nothing to get excited for there. One really good change is Gift of the Naru. As it stands in TBC at the moment, it's got a 1.5 second cast with a 3-minute cooldown. On a level 1 character, this heals the target for 50 damage over 15 seconds. Now, this scales with your level, whereas this gets a huge change in Wrath of the Lich King, where Gift of the Naru now is instant cast, which is a really, really nice change. It has a 3-minute cooldown, and whilst it still heals the target for 50 over 15 seconds at level 1, as you would expect, the amount healed also now scales with your spell power or attack power, whichever is higher. So no matter what class you're playing, whether you're a Draenei Hunter, a Draenei Warrior, a Draenei Shaman, it doesn't matter. You're going to benefit from the attack power or spell power, contributing to much larger heals with Gift of the Naru. Although it's not a DPS gain, still, it's a nice to have, and definitely while you're leveling, it can save your life once or twice. So in TBC, you've got Inspiring Presence, which increases your chance to hit with spells by 1% for you and your party members within 30 yards. In Wrath of the Lich King, it's changed to Heroic Presence, where it increases your chance to hit with spells and attacks by 1% for you and all party members within 30 yards. Now, one thing that's worth remembering here is if you were to create a warrior, a hunter, or a paladin, you would bring melee hit or physical hit, however you want to look at it. So the major change is the fact that now it doesn't matter what Draenei you play, you bring both physical hit and spell hit. So like many buffs in Wrath of the Lich King, they become raid-wide. This still is party only, so you will need a couple of Draenei. And the reason I say a couple is because you're going to probably have a healer group, so you're not really going to need a Draenei in there. They're not really going to benefit from the 1% hit, unless maybe you've got like a shaman that's on interrupt duty or something like that. You know, there could be niche circumstances for wanting that extra 1% hit. But really, you want one with your melee group, one with your caster group. But it's really strong when you really think about how much hit rating is required for 1% hit. So it's roughly 26 hit rating for 1% spell hit, and then around 32 hit rating for 1% melee or physical hit. So if you now multiply that across your group, obviously you're gaining that bonus as well. It's a huge number. You know, even at a bare minimum, if you're in a spellcasting group, you're saying 132 hit rating. That's huge. You're not going to get that from any other racial bonus in the game. So actually making sure you've got a couple of Draenei, whatever, ordinarily Shaman for Alliance is what you would expect. It's a big bonus. Shadow Resistance also goes for a small change. So Shadow Resistance in TBC gives you a Shadow Resistance increase of 10, funny enough. Whereas actually in Wrath of the Lich King, it's going to change, so it'll reduce the chance that you'll be hit by shadow spells by 2%. Moving on to the Dwarf. Find Treasure is exactly the same, so it allows the Dwarf to sense nearby treasure, making it appear on the minimap, and it lasts until cancelled. In Wrath of the Lich King, it's absolutely identical. In TBC, where you get the 10 Frost Resist, you're going to notice this throughout the video and the Horde video, that the way the resistance works has changed. So Frost Resist by 10, that's what you get currently in TBC. Whereas in Wrath of the Lich King, it reduces the chance that you'll be hit by frost spells by 2%. In TBC, you get your chance to critically hit with guns by 1%. You still get that in Wrath of the Lich King. And just when you think we're going to talk about Stoneform, no, we're not. So there's actually an additional racial bonus for dwarves that comes in Wrath of the Lich King, which is Mace Specialization. You'll be familiar with Mace Specialization from humans, where you get an expertise increase with maces and two-handed maces by 5. You will find out why this is actually incredibly overpowered when we get to the human section, but 5 expertise with one-handed maces and two-handed maces, when you think about what dwarves can be, warriors, paladins, that's enough really. Expertise by 5 is a huge amount of expertise rating that you don't need to find. Okay, and now finally Stone Form. So a 3-minute cooldown instant cast. While active, it grants immunity to bleed, poison, and disease effects. In addition, your armor is increased by 10%. So that's the TBC version of Stone Form. When we look at the Wrath of the Lich King version of Stone Form, it's only a 2-minute cooldown now instead of 3, and it removes all poison, disease, and bleed effects and increases your armor by 10%. So it no longer grants immunity like it does in TBC. It only removes the effects that are on you, but you can remove them more frequently as it's only got a 2-minute cooldown. You can look at this 2 ways. You can see it as a nerf, or you can look at it as a buff. It really is a nerf all round, and the reason I say it's a nerf all round is although you're getting it on a 2-minute cooldown instead of 3 now, the very nice thing, even from a PvP perspective, is when you pop Stone Form and a rogue's attacking you, their poisons are doing absolutely nothing to you, for the duration, so you can't get crippling poisoned or anything like that. Whereas now in Wrath of the Lich King, as soon as you've got rid of the poisons that are on you, they can instantly start building them up again. Although, you've only got to wait 2 minutes till you can remove poisons again. Whereas, from a PvE perspective, if there's a particularly important poison that you need to remove from yourself, or a disease that you need to remove from yourself, or even a bleed, you can now remove it more frequently. I still see it as a nerf, but the fact that it's got 1 minute shorter cooldown now is nice anyway. I would still say it's particularly useful for tanks. Getting the 10% armor bonus and being able to remove those things every 2 minutes is very nice. It's definitely got its place in PvP as well. So it is all round a decent racial, but you're also getting quite a decent set of racials with the expertise, with Stone Form, treasure finding, meh. But anyway, onto the gnome. You've got your arcane resistance increased by 10 in TBC. As you can expect, that's changed like the other classes have. So it now reduces the chance you'll be hit by arcane spells by 2%. And then everything else remains the same. You've still got your 15 skill in engineering. You've got Escape Artist on a 1.75 minute cooldown, which escapes the effect of immobilization or movement speed reduction effects. And you've got Expansive Mind, which increases your intellect by 5%. And as you can see, all of these are exactly the same in Wrath of the Lich King. So not really a lot to talk about. If you like playing a gnome, you like the 5% bonus intellect, you like Escape Artist, then continue to play a gnome. But it's quite sad to see because it is actually, I would say, one of the weaker races, even though arguably one of the better looking races. I know a lot of you Taurans like smashing gnomes up, but actually I quite like the aesthetic of a gnome. Shouldn't have said that. Obviously, the biggest bonus here is the 5% to your intellect, though. Lots of casters in particular. Obviously, we're not really going to talk about melee here because melee, as far as gnomes go, I would say, other than for looks, there's not really much need to play one or much reason to play one. Whereas with casters, the vast majority of DPS caster specs in Wrath of the Lich King get, X amount of their intellect as spell power, in talents. So actually getting 5% intellect when you've got a massive mana pool just equals more spell power. So overall, pretty decent, but it's the human that's going to throw a spanner in the works. We've only got Night Elf to go, and then you'll fully understand why I said human's going to throw a spanner in the works for casters. And Night Elf get an all-round buff, I would say, no matter what spec you want to play. So if we look at TBC first, nature resistance by 10, you know exactly what you're going to get here. In Wrath of the Lich King, it will reduce the chance that you'll get hit by nature spells by 2%, same as all the other races. Quickness in TBC currently gives you 1% dodge chance, whereas actually in Wrath of the Lich King, quickness reduces the chance that melee and range attackers will hit you by 2%. Now that's really nice. Even Wisp Spirit in Wrath of the Lich King has had a buff. So currently in TBC, it transforms you into a wisp upon death, increasing speed by 50%, whereas in Wrath of the Lich King, it's actually 75%. And come on, who don't like moving faster? That's actually really nice and one that's not spoke about enough. Before we get on to how Shadow Meld has changed, there's actually an addition to the talents. So we've got Elusiveness, which reduces the chance enemies have to detect you while shadow melded or stealthed. So getting plus bonus to your stealth as a Night Elf Rogue, as a Night Elf Druid, or if you're just shadow melded, is a really, really nice free bonus. A bonus that probably didn't need to be put in, if I'm completely honest with you, but is really, really nice and welcome to especially people like me who play a Night Elf Druid. And then finally, how has Shadow Meld changed? No longer an absolutely useless cooldown. In TBC, on a 10-second cooldown, activate to slip into the shadows, reducing the chance for enemies to detect your presence. Lasts until cancelled or upon moving. Night Elf Rogues and Druids with Shadow Meld are more difficult to detect while stealthed or prowling. And you're now looking and thinking, well, it's a 10-second cooldown, that's nice, but the big issue with it is this. It can't be used in combat. You can spam that button, it ain't going to let you use it. That's right, in Wrath of the Lich King, it now has a 2-minute cooldown, but it acts like a vanish. So activate to slip into the shadows, reducing the chance for enemies to detect your presence. Lasts until cancelled or upon moving. Any threat is restored versus enemies still in combat upon cancellation of this effect. So if you're the last one alive and the boss is about to kill you, it's about to be a wipe, bang, quick shadow meld sorted, or instantly press shadow meld in PvP to drop their target. It can now be used in combat. It's got a 2-minute cooldown. Obviously, the elusiveness talent where you get the bonus to your shadow meld and stealth has sort of been taken out of the TBC Shadow Meld and given it its own racial, its own separate racial. But you will love Shadow Meld in Wrath of the Lich King as any class, because being able to save repair bills or save a run back, because as a Druid, you quickly pop Shadow Meld just as everyone else dies, you can then start resing the party up. So really good. Quite honestly, last but not least, last but most overpowered, the human. Now, I just want to put it out there. It's not just the addition of every man for himself, which we're going to get to in a minute, that makes these overpowered. Changes to some classes as well. For example, warlocks getting extra spell power from spirit. Fire mages getting extra crit from spirit with molten armor. There's class changes that actually have made human even more desirable for many, many specs. So we'll start with diplomacy. Reputation gains increased by 10%. This is still the same in Wrath of the Lich King, but it's just not a massive deal, because in Wrath of the Lich King, arguably, reputation is far less important than it was in TBC. Now, humans used to, in TBC, get mace specialization, which increased your expertise with maces and two-handed maces by 5. You've still got mace specialization, but now it's only by 3. So now you probably understand when I mentioned about the dwarf racial getting 5 expertise from maces, whereas the human only gets 3. It seems a bit strange. I'm hoping that that's not wrong. Perception in TBC is a 3-minute cooldown that dramatically increases the stealth detection for 20 seconds. In Wrath of the Lich King, this goes for a change, so it's just a passive that increases your stealth detection. So it's not drastically, it's only a minor increase to your stealth detection, but it's always on. Sword specialization, much like mace specialization, goes through, you could call it a small nerf, because it once gave 5 expertise rating in TBC, whereas in Wrath of the Lich King it now only gives 3. The human spirit goes through quite a big nerf, because currently in TBC it gives a spirit increase of 10%, whereas in Wrath of the Lich King it only gives 3%. But this will be due to reasons that I've already mentioned. So 3% spirit increase is big enough for it to be obviously a very, very good racial bonus for things like warlocks, mages, priests. Anyone who can make use of spirit, it can be useful for. Whereas if you think in TBC, it was really only good for healers, or specific healers like priests. Whereas now, because it's got such a good bonus for even spellcasters, where you're now getting spell power from it or spell crit from it, as well as it still being good for regen for your healers, if it was to have stayed at 10%, it would have been absolutely broken. Because even at 3%, it's really, really strong. And I think being a human mage or a human warlock over a gnome mage or a gnome warlock is an absolute no-brainer. I don't think you should see as many gnome warlocks and mages unless it's for aesthetic purposes, because human is just better. And we don't need to look at TBC anymore, because every man for himself, which is the reason that most people will roll human outside of the things that I've already mentioned. It's a PvP trinket without using a PvP trinket. So it removes all movement impairing effects and all effects which cause loss of control of your character. This effect shares a cooldown with other similar effects, and it has a 2-minute cooldown. So what does this mean? It means you can use 2 PvP trinkets, neither of them being your, obviously, get out of jail free trinket, if you like, the ones that break stuns and things. You've just got it as a racial on a 2-minute cooldown, the same as a trinket, but you can now use a DPS trinket in its place. So it's huge. But not only that, the PvE potential of it as well is massive. There's plenty of bosses that stun, plenty of bosses that fear, and you can break out of those every 2 minutes. So as a tank, it's useful. A healer, it's useful. A DPS, it's useful. It is quite literally anyone who can play a human. And I genuinely mean this. I can't think of any other race where if you can play a human as your class, going human should be what you do. I can't think of any class where I'd be like, well, no, I would choose dwarf. Or no, I would choose, because even though a dwarf paladin, for example, will get that mace specialization, the human gets it, and every man for himself. At the loss of stone form, yeah, I'd take every man for himself. I tell you now, Wrath of the Lich King is the rise of the humans. I hope you found this useful. That's all the Alliance racials. I will be going over all the Horde racials tomorrow, and then I've got the big Rogue video and sort of a DPS tier video. I don't want to call it a tier list because it's not a tier list. I hate tier lists. Be sure to look out for those, and if you want to see those, hit that subscribe button. Consider joining the channel as a member just to show additional support. Like the video, and I'll see you on the next one.